Hello. Welcome to my front porch. This is where I've been hanging out, watching my email, seeing if you guys need anything, putting together my lessons. This has essentially been my home office lately because I'm tired of sitting on my couch in there. And I want to stand up a little bit and want to pretend like I'm outside a little bit. So here I am. I've got windows on my front porch, but whatever. It's close enough to outside. Anyways, welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. So your screen is going to kind of look right now like we're doing notes. We're not really doing notes. You don't need to write anything in your notebook or anything like that. Follow along. I'm trying to adapt this particular activity, which is usually one of my favorite ones to do in the classroom. I'm trying to adapt it to something I can do on video. So it's not going to be perfect, but like usual, bear with me. We're doing what we can here, right? Um, so last week, you should have watched a couple of Ed puzzle videos that introduced you to the idea of natural selection. Um, Based on your responses from the April 8th update video, a lot of you guys don't know much about evolution at all. Some of you do. Some of you are receptive to the idea, but you don't know anything about it. Some of you don't even know what the word means at all, and that's perfectly fine. I kind of assumed that you knew at least what the word meant. And I'm sorry, I guess I didn't explain what evolution was very well. Evolution is the idea that every living thing alive on Earth, whether it's humans or cats or dogs or fish or plants or anything alive, it's the idea that all of the living things that exist today descended from one original living thing. By the way, living things include things like bacteria and little cells as well. So that's what evolution is, the idea that all living things have essentially one great 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 grandparent, but add a lot of more greats in there. That wasn't enough greats. So we'll talk about that. Maybe the natural selection videos you watched sort of helped you get a sense of that. Um, Anyway, we're going to talk more about natural selection today. I've got this little screen down here, video thing. For now, I'm not going to be down here the whole time. I just wanted to introduce you to some things. So, normally in the classroom, what I would do is I have all these little paper moths that I would tape up around the classroom. Here's a couple of them I've got. They're right next to each other right now. There's some backwards here. Some bigger ones, some smaller ones. Are all these different colored moths. Normally, what I would do is tape up all these moths around the classroom, and that's sort of how we would start the lesson. Is I would give you a certain chunk of time. I think usually I would give about 2 minutes, and I would let you just walk around the classroom and find as many of these little guys as you can, and then we'll come back and talk about it a little bit. Um, Obviously, I can't let you walk around my classroom right now. So what I did instead is I taped a bunch of them around my porch here, and I took a picture. So in a second, what I'm going to do to start us off is I'm going to go to the next slide. I'm going to move my face out of the way because you don't need to see me anymore. I'm going to move that out of the way. I'll put on the next slide in this presentation, and that next slide is going to be a picture of this area of my porch, and there's going to be a bunch of these in different colors, hidden. Some are hidden better than others. They're going to be put around the area. And what I want you to do, I'm going to give you 45 seconds, and I want you to count and see how many of them you can find. I'm not going to tell you how many there are. I'm just going to see how many of them you can find. So let me pull up my stopwatch real quick here. All right. I've got it ready to go. I'll let it go for 45 seconds. So again, just find as many moths as you can. Keep a count in your head, and then we'll come back in a second. So I'll move myself out of the way here. I don't think you should need to see me anymore. Again, all the moths are going to be, I'll show you one more time, shaped like this, but in different colors. This one's purple. There's going to be some green and some yellow and some red and all different colors. So look for that shape. Move myself, and your time starts now. 20 seconds left. All right, that was 45 seconds. How many did you count? If you counted more than 22, you're a liar. If you counted all 22, there are 22 moths there. Here's where they all are. Okay. Now, normally around the classroom, I think I have like, how many? Normally I would hide 47 moths around the classroom. This area is much smaller than my classroom, so I couldn't get that many. So now let's talk about sort of the point of this. Okay, some of them you probably found pretty easy. This was a pretty easy one, right? A big orange moth on the window stood out pretty well. Another easy one might have been this one back here, a pink moth stuck into the little keys of my keyboard thing. Some of these guys stood out pretty well, but some of them you maybe didn't find. This is one that was hidden particularly well. This little beige color on the flower pot blended in pretty well. I think this little purple one hid pretty well on the carpet. This little gray one, well, you may have found that one. This white one up on the ceiling, I think, was one of the most challenging ones. So, unfortunately, I can't really have you tell me how many you found, but I would wager that probably y'all found maybe 15 or so. I have no clue. I'm just guessing. So, the reason I do this is I want to talk about why animals blend into their surroundings. So, I don't know if you guys know this, but birds eat moths. That's one of the things that birds like to eat. So imagine that you are a bird and you just came up on this scene and you're hungry, you want a snack. Who are you going to eat? Well, probably you're going to first think to eat this guy right here, right? Because maybe you see him right away. You're like, oh, there's food. I'm going to eat that one. Once you've eaten that one, you're going to look around and say, oh, well, I see this guy pretty easily. I'm going to go ahead and eat that. Oh, there's another one. I'll go ahead and eat that one. You're going to eat the moths that you can see, right? If you can't see this moth up here on the ceiling, you're not going to eat him because you don't even know that he's there. You guys might know that this word is camouflage. Animals use camouflage. There's all kinds of different ways that animals can use camouflage. Moths are a color. So usually when I talk camouflage, a lot of students tend to think of chameleons because chameleons can change color, right? You might know that. Moths can't change color. An individual can't change color, but moths come in all kinds of different colors. And some are more well suited to their environment than others. In this particular environment, what color moth does best? Well, it kind of depends on where it's at. I think a lot of these sort of more tan, there's a lot of like tans and like a beige, like a light beige color going on in this particular picture. There's also a decent amount of like a dark, like a blue things on the windows, dark windows here. I've got some things hidden on this dark pot here, my dark coffee mug, and this darker little tree stump I've got. So there's a couple different colors that might do well in this environment. I would say colors like reds and oranges and pinks don't do particularly well, but a lot of other colors do. So that's kind of the way I like to start thinking about a real concrete example of natural selection. Imagining that you're a bird, you're looking for these moths, you're going to eat the ones that are visible to you. Now, here's the other thing. If you eat, say, this orange moth, is that moth going to be able to reproduce and make more orange baby moths? No, it's not going to, right? But who is going to reproduce and make more baby moths is maybe this white one here or this kind of beige one up here. And they are going to make more white and beige colored baby moths, right? Because that's the genes that they have. That's the genes that they're going to pass on. So by eating and getting rid of these ones that don't do too well in their environment, you're going to end up with more moths that do succeed, that do well in their environment. Because the ones who are left, who blended in, they're going to make babies, and their babies are probably also going to blend in. So that's sort of the basis idea of natural selection. Getting rid of the things that don't do well in the environment, keeping the things that do well in the environment, and allowing those things that do well to reproduce and make more babies that also do well in the environment. All right. So 22 moths. Congratulations if you found, let's say more than 15. If you found more than 15, I think you did pretty well. All right. The next thing that we're going to do is go over to this document called Manchester Moths. We're going to look at a real life story of some moths in the environment and sort of read about them. Now, I will give you a link to this document so you can pull up the document on your own device. If you would like to just read it on your own, you can. However, I would suggest you, maybe if you want to pull it up, that's fine. But I'm going to read through it and maybe talk a little bit more in depth about it. So it's probably going to be advantageous to you to continue at least listening to the video, if not watching the video as I talk through it. After the video, after we read through the article, there's going to be a couple wrap-up questions for you to answer in Canvas, and that'll be all for today. Okay, so this is called the Peppered Moth story. Couple things to look at here. This photo shows two moths, one in the peppered or speckled phenotype and the other in the black phenotype. Can you find both of them? The black one usually stands out pretty well for us, but the peppered one, do you see the peppered phenotype? If you don't, it's right there. It's usually a little easier to see on your own computer screens. I usually would project this onto the screen up front, and then it can be a little bit harder to see, but usually if you're looking at it on your own paper, your own device, you can see it a little bit better. This is all just information of where the article came from. All right, let's go ahead and get started reading. So back in the early 1800s, a small black moth was found in Manchester, England for the first time. It wasn't a new species of moth, but it was an unusual black variety of the peppered moth, a fairly common insect that is usually pale gray with black speckles. By the way, I'm going to interrupt real quick here. I obviously have some things highlighted in here. I think that the things that I highlighted are sort of the most important bits of the article. They sort of, I highlighted the most important parts. I guess that's about all there is to it. All right, here we go. The new black variety was named Carbonaria. Over time, more and more of these black peppered moths were found in the industrial north of England, and by the end of the century, they had more or less replaced the original pale moth. Fast forward to the 21st century, and people are still interested in the story of the peppered moth. In the 1950s, scientists hypothesized that the dark peppered moth had replaced the original pale form because birds had eaten the pale moths. Remember, this is just like we were just talking about with the moths that I have around my porch. You would have eaten the ones that you can see. Don't eat the ones that you can't see. The pale moth's speckling makes it well camouflaged among lichen on the bark of trees where it rests during the day, like in this photo here. That was the photo above. But the black moths looked better camouflaged on the soot-colored bark of trees around the smoky cities. This is the photo below. So you see the peppered one stands out more here. The black one blends in more. Experiments with moths placed on tree trunks showed that birds did indeed find the moths based on the color of the bark of the trees. The story became a classic example of evolution by natural selection. Now, real quick, soot-covered bark is something that a lot of times we need to talk about what that means. What is soot? Well, there's a couple places that you might see soot. Soot is basically like smoke residue. So a lot of times if you have a candle burning in like a jar of some type, you might find like a black residue along the top edge of the jar. That's residue from the burning of the candle. That is soot. the insides of chimneys, the inside of a tailpipe of a car is going to have soot in it. It's basically this black gunk from smoke. So the soot covered bark of trees around smoky cities. So the cities were smoky because, as it said, where did it say? This is found in the industrial north of England. So early 1800s, we call the Industrial Revolution. It's when a bunch of factories started being made, especially in the industrial north of England. They're making all kinds of stuff up there. The factories burn coal for power. Coal produces soot. That soot gets deposited on the trees around the smoky cities. So that's when we start seeing these black moths, is when we start seeing these trees covered in the smoky soot. All right, so let's move on. Towards the end of the 20th century, scientists found that some of the assumptions made in the original experiments weren't true in nature, as many of the moths rested on tree branches rather than on tree trunks, meaning the color might not have played as big of a role as they had originally thought. Critics of evolution and natural selection latched onto these flaws to try to undermine the evidence of evolution. So basically, what this is saying is that, well, the moths don't always land on the sooty areas, so that's total crap. But so that's what the critics were saying. We're gonna keep reading, but that is reasonable. Just like maybe one of the tan colored moths didn't land on a tan colored area on my porch. Maybe instead the tan colored moth would have landed on my colorful little area rug, and then it would have stood out. So the idea is that moths don't always land on the trunks, but anyway, let's keep moving. Mike Madras, I'll say that that's how you pronounce it. I don't know. Anyway, he's a scientist at the University of Cambridge, and he studied peppered moths to try to better understand the behavior of the moths and the birds that ate them. He released moths and allowed them to settle on trees by themselves. So he didn't place them, he just let them sit wherever they wanted. Then he studied which ones were eaten by birds. Unfortunately, he died shortly before he completed the study, but his colleagues continued the work, and it was confirmed that bird predation was sufficient to explain the spread of the dark peppered moth in the industrialized areas, just as originally thought. So those people who were saying, well, but they don't land on the trunk, you're not wrong, but it was confirmed that the bird predation could explain the spread of that dark moth. The story of the peppered moth is particularly powerful as it is so easy to understand. Dark moths that sit on dark trees are better camouflaged than pale moths. Birds eat the moths based on which ones they can find. As moth color is genetically determined, this is the definition of evolution, namely that change in gene frequency over time. Change in gene frequency over time. As the change is due to different levels of predation on one particular color variety, this is natural selection. Interestingly, after the Clean Air Act of the 1950s, dark moths declined and were replaced again by the original pale moths, which were better camouflaged on the bark of the trees not covered by soot. So quickly, Clean Air Act of the 1950s said, hey, y'all factories that are burning all that coal and making all that soot that's covering the trees and smoke residue, stop doing that. So the trees stopped being covered in soot. The tree color lightened back up again. And so the light colored moths blended in better. Real quick, if we look at this picture, I think this does a good job of explaining it. So white moths lay many eggs, which develop into caterpillars and then adults. So that's our reproduction. Variation means that of those babies, most are going to be born with that same pale color variety, but a couple of them are going to be on the darker side. Okay, so then when birds show up and these moths are on this dark colored tree trunk, they're going to eat the ones that they find first. So in this particular case, they're going to eat the lighter colored ones, leaving the darker colored ones behind. So that's our competition and predation. The dark and the light colored moths are competing and being preyed upon, and the ones who are surviving are the ones that go on to reproduce. They've been selected for. Okay, so then those dark moths go on and have babies, and those babies end up being more often dark and occasionally light. And that's how the light color can come back, is that eventually when the sootiness of the trees goes away, those light colored ones are still around, and then they'll be eaten less often and then come back and become more common again. So, back to the reading. Back in the 1800s, people who we might today call citizen scientists went out and looked at the animals and plants in their surroundings. Their curiosity led them to look closely, to record what they saw, and to share their findings. Their collections of pinned insects in museums, such as the Manchester Museum, represent both the scientific data and the history of the peppered moth story. Peppered moth story is also an affirmation of the scientific method of asking questions, making predictions, testing ideas, and accepting or rejecting predictions based on the evidence. Science doesn't always need fancy equipment or lots of funding, just people who ask questions and then set out to find the answer. All right, so again, you've got this whole article linked if you want to read it for yourself or have it as reference. And I would recommend opening that up because in Canvas, you've got a few wrap-up questions that will talk about both this article. So it's going to be good to have this article to reference, and then also comparing it to the activity we did looking around my front porch for the moths. So do your best answering those questions. If you have any questions for me, if anything isn't making sense, please send me an email and I will help you out. And I think that is about it for today. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're staying safe and healthy. Have a great day.